Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Thursday, November 6th, 2025. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. We got a little call to action here, something that we could all do on Thursday. The Senate will vote to block war with Venezuela. So the Senate is expected to vote on Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time on a bipartisan war powers resolution that would block President Trump from attacking Venezuela, a vote that comes amid reports that he is reviewing several options for starting a war with the country, and Americans can contact their senators and urge them to support SJ Res 90, which was introduced by Senators Tim Kaine, Rand Paul, and Adam Schiff. So it is a bipartisan piece of legislation here. So contact your senator. If you're American, which most of you are, it's easy to do. Give them a call, send them an email. I know it might feel kind of silly, but I think there's an opportunity here. If the Senate votes, even if, they're not going to get enough for it to be veto proof, but if the Senate passes this, that is going to be a message to Trump as he is deciding on what he's going to do here with Venezuela, if the decision hasn't been made already. So call your senator. You could also go to 1-833-STOPWAR.com, and they have this handy website here with some details about the legislation, and they also have a list of what the senators are expected to vote, of how they're expected to vote, and how they voted on a previous war powers resolution that would have blocked the boat strikes. So that resolution was voted on October 8th, and it failed in a vote of 48 to 51. But there's a chance here that a few more Republicans will support the war powers resolution blocking a war with Venezuela without congressional authorization. That's what this bill would do. It would require congressional authorization for a war. Again, the boat strike bill failed. Senator Rand Paul and Lisa Murkowski were the only Republicans who voted in favor of it. But there was a report from Politico on Wednesday that said at least 4 other Senate Republicans are questioning the legal rationale for the boat strikes, which there is none. It's an illegal bombing campaign. And it's a sign that they might vote in favor of this Venezuela war powers resolution. Those 4 Republican senators include Mike Rounds of South Dakota, Todd Young of Indiana, Susan Collins of Maine, and Jerry Moran from Kansas. So if any of those are your senators, especially make an effort to call them and tell them to support this bill, because apparently they're on the fence. And if one of your senators is a sponsor, like me in Virginia, Tim Kaine is a sponsor, drop him a line and say thank you for supporting this resolution. As much as it hurts to compliment a politician, again, I think, this is worth a try here because we're seeing this increasing skepticism among a small number, but some Republicans in Congress. There's also these elections that just happened where the Democrats won very big. So if you're Trump and you're assessing these things, of a Senate vote to block you from waging a war with Venezuela could, make you think twice before dropping bombs on the country. And a reminder from yesterday, according to the New York Times, and this looks like this was one of those purposeful leaks from the Trump administration, Trump is considering several options, including bombing military targets in the country, trying to send a special operations force to kidnap or kill Maduro. And then the third option is actually trying to capture airfields and oil infrastructure inside Venezuela. So they're planning, or at least discussing, a real war here with a very big country. The chaos that could ensue, we can't even really imagine it at the moment. So this is something I think we have an opportunity here to maybe get a good vote in the Senate about it. And, it's easy to do. Call, send an email, tell your senator to support this thing. All right, so the next one here, Trump repeats blatantly false claim on the boat bombing campaign. So President Trump on Wednesday claimed that for every boat the U.S. bombs in the waters of Latin America, 25,000 American lives are saved, a blatant lie that he's used to justify the U.S. bombing campaign in the region and push toward a regime change war in Venezuela. So I've heard Trump say this before, maybe even a few times before, and it's one of those things, like initially I kind of laughed it off, like it's so absurd. But the fact is that he's lying us into war. And, you know, he needs to be scrutinized for this, as absurd as it sounds. So this is what he said. He gave a speech in Miami on Wednesday. He said, quote, every boat that we hit, if it gets through, kills 25,000 Americans plus. Every time we hit a boat, we save 25,000 American lives, end quote. So Trump and his top officials have justified the strikes and the extrajudicial executions at sea by pointing to overdoses in the U.S., which, according to CDC data, killed 80,391 Americans in 2024, which is a decrease of 26.9% from the year prior. So that's a good sign, at least, that it's declined. But anyway, so 80,000 overdose deaths last year. He bombed 17 boats. So by his numbers, they've saved 425,000 lives somehow. And the majority of the overdose deaths, nearly 50,000, were caused by fentanyl or other synthetic opioids. And Trump has also previously claimed that they're bombing fentanyl shipments, but it's just not true. The Pentagon has told Congress that all of the boats it hit were allegedly smuggling cocaine. Now, of course, they also have not provided any evidence to back up this claim, to back up the claims about what the boats are carrying. But even by their own claims, they're not targeting fentanyl shipments, despite what Trump has said before. And then another false claim that's been pushed by the Trump administration to justify the bombing campaign is the idea that the boats being targeted in the Caribbean were attempting to bring drugs to the U.S., but a U.S. official has told Dropsite News that many of the vessels that have been struck do not even have the requisite gasoline or motor capacity to reach U.S. waters. And a report from the Washington Post cited officials from the U.S. and other countries who said the route that the U.S. was targeting near Venezuela is mainly used to smuggle cocaine and marijuana to Trinidad and Tobago. And apparently the marijuana gets sold there, but then the cocaine is shipped off to Europe or West Africa. So it's not even a transit route to bring cocaine to the U.S. So since the bombing campaign began, the U.S. has blown up 17 boats, as I said, and killed 66 people. And again, they're just lying to us in like many different ways. We're being lied to about this whole thing. And so it's just another reason to just oppose. I mean, you know, really try to oppose this and try to get more people on board with opposing it. All right, the next one here. So getting into some Gaza stuff. Israel is violating Gaza deal by limiting food. So far too little food and other types of aid are entering Gaza, Reuters reported on Tuesday, citing aid agencies as Israel continues to violate a key part of the ceasefire deal. Under the ceasefire agreement, Israel pledged to immediately allow the commencement of full entry of humanitarian aid and relief at a minimum consistent with the January 2025 ceasefire deal, under which Israel agreed to allow 600 aid trucks to enter Gaza per day. Gaza's media office said on Saturday that since the ceasefire deal went into effect on October 10th, an average of 145 aid trucks have entered per day, so not close to 600. And the UN's World Food Program has said that just half of the needed food has been coming in, and Palestinian aid groups say that overall aid volumes were between a quarter and a third of the expected amount. Last week, the UN's humanitarian agency OSHA said that 1 in 10 children screened in Gaza were still acutely malnourished. And the World Food Program, or WFP, has said that it has opened 44 food distribution points in Gaza, far short of its goal of 145. You could see a picture here from Gaza on Wednesday of Palestinians gathered trying to get food at a charity kitchen in southern Gaza. You see how desperate they all look. This is still going on. And so a spokeswoman, Abir Atifa, a spokeswoman for the WFP, told reporters on Tuesday that just 2 border crossings into Gaza are open to aid deliveries, and none are open in northern Gaza, meaning that Israel is not fulfilling its commitment to allow the full entry of humanitarian aid. This is what she said, quote, "We need full access. We need everything to be moving fast. We are in a race against time. The winter months are coming. People are still suffering from hunger and the needs are overwhelming. The majority of households that we've spoken to are only consuming cereals, pulses, dry food rations, which people cannot survive on for a long time. Meat, eggs, vegetables, fruits are being consumed extremely rarely," end quote. So a report, I think it was from Middle East Eye, that we had on the page yesterday in the lower part, Palestinians saying like the only kind of food they can get is like unhealthy. Like they can get chocolate and candy, but they can't get like staples, you know, that they need for real nutrition. So Palestinians living in the rubble of Gaza are also facing a shortage of shelter, as not enough tents have entered the strip and older ones are wearing out as winter is approaching. So they're not letting shelter, you know, they don't have access to adequate shelters. You know, I've said earlier on that I think one sign, what would be a good sign that the ceasefire deal might actually lead to something good, lead to, you know, long-term peace, is if they let tents and other, you know, like mobile homes, more permanent structures and construction equipment to enter Gaza, but they haven't allowed that, which I think is a very bad sign. And we know that the U.S. is pushing, or Jared Kushner at least, is pushing for this plan to start reconstruction only in the Israeli-occupied side of Gaza. All right, so the next one here, Israeli army and settlers strike 2,350 times in the West Bank last month. This article is from Al Jazeera. So Israeli forces and settlers have carried out 2,350 attacks across the occupied West Bank last month in an ongoing cycle of terror, according to the Palestinian Authority's Colonization and Wall Resistance Commission. So they documented Israeli forces carrying out 1,584 attacks. So this is the Israeli military, including direct physical attacks, the demolition of homes, and the uprooting of olive trees. And they also noted 766 attacks by settlers, and that's just a huge rate of settler attacks, which have just continued to increase in recent years. You know, we've seen several like spikes. One was right after this current Israeli government came in December 2022, they put out their coalition statement, said that they were going to prioritize expanding settlements with the goal of annexing the West Bank. You have settlers in very high-level positions, so that emboldened the settlers. And then after October 7th, just less attention was on the West Bank, so that emboldened them even more. And then when this new Trump administration came in and Mike Huckabee was put in as the U.S. ambassador, you have an openly pro-settlement ambassador, so that emboldened them even further. And they've just been on a rampage in the West Bank. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. wants sanctions on Syria's Sharaa lifted. So the U.S. is asking the UN Security Council to lift sanctions on Syrian President Ahmed al-Sharaa, a former al-Qaeda leader, and other members of his government before he visits the White House next week, the Associated Press has reported. Sharaa, formerly known as Abu Muhammad al-Julani, was first sanctioned by the UN in 2013 for his association with al-Qaeda. And if you look at the actual UN listing, you know who it says his associates were at the time? Ayman al-Zawahiri, who is bin Laden's number 2, who helped plot the 9/11 attacks, and Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who was the founder of ISIS. The UN listing says that Sharaa was deputized by Baghdadi to lead Syria's al-Qaeda affiliate, known at the time as the al-Nusra Front, and his position as the leader of the al-Qaeda group was confirmed by Zawahiri. Sharaa got his start with al-Qaeda in Iraq, where he fought against U.S. troops and was imprisoned from 2006 to 2011 before traveling to Syria. So I know I've covered this background a lot, but just important, I think. In 2016, Sharaa claimed that the al-Nusra Front was cutting ties with al-Qaeda and thanked the commanders of al-Qaeda for having understood the need to break ties. And al-Qaeda said that they told him to do it, basically. And then in 2017, he formed Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS, and that's the group that has taken power in Damascus. And so the U.S. wants these sanctions lifted before he visits the White House. And according to The National, the U.S.'s resolution, this is interesting, for the UN Security Council initially called for HTS, because HTS is still listed by the UN as a terrorist organization. It was on the U.S. list, but it's been removed. So apparently the U.S. initially put forward a resolution to lift the sanctions on Sharaa, remove HTS from the designation, but China objected. And it's interesting why China objected, because of HTS's ties with I believe it's the Turkestan Islamic Party, the Uyghur fighters, the Uyghur jihadists in Syria who helped HTS take over. And according to the reports from Latakia, they were involved in the massacres of Alawites. But it's because of HTS's ties with TI. Is it TIP? Their stated goal is to establish an Islamic State in Xinjiang, the western province of China where the Uyghurs are. So now the U.S. just narrowed it to just lift sanctions on Sharaa and his interior minister. So you see all the people, after the New York City election on Twitter posting pictures of the towers blown up because a Muslim is going to be the mayor now. And I don't see any of them talking about how Trump is hosting a former associate of Zawahiri at the White House. All right, so the next one here, Israel blocks workers at new checkpoint in Syria's Quneitra. So an article here from Jason Ditz. So Israel's operations in southwestern Syria continue apace, with troops and tanks entering the area of Quneitra Governorate near Japata el-Kashab. So this is one of the villages in the governorate. They set up a checkpoint preventing workers from accessing the roads leading to a smaller village. And so this is just another example of a further incursion by the Israeli troops who are occupying southwestern Syria, which they invaded after the regime change. And they're acting. It's just really something here. So after Assad was thrown out and HTS took power, Netanyahu went up on Mount Hermon on the Syrian side, this territory that they just annexed. Not annexed, that they took over after the regime change, and he basically took credit for the regime change for helping put these guys in power, and then they turn around and say, oh, now that these crazy jihadist guys are in power, we got to take territory and create like a buffer zone and everything. So, but there, this goes on, and there's been all these reports of security talks between Israel and Syria, but it doesn't seem like they've gotten anywhere. All right, so the next one here, State Department says the U.S. is not leaving Iraq. So a U.S. State Department spokesperson told the Shafaq news agency on Wednesday that the U.S. is not withdrawing from Iraq, but shifting its military role to a bilateral relationship under a deal that will end the mission of the U.S.-led anti-ISIS coalition in the country. So this isn't really new news, but I wrote it up because I had that story yesterday about Soudani, the Iraqi prime minister, saying we'll disarm the PMF once the U.S. leaves and the U.S.-led coalition leaves. And the way it gets reported by all the media outlets is that the U.S. is leaving by September 2026. But when the deal was signed, the Pentagon said, we're not leaving. We're just going to shift our role in Iraq. But this is just confirmation of that. And this is in response to Soudani's comments, to Soudani saying that they won't disarm this group, the Popular Mobilization Forces, which is an umbrella group of Shia militias that the U.S. has. That they were formed initially to fight ISIS. They were on the same side as the U.S. in the major battles against ISIS, in 2016, 2017. But then after that, they basically started fighting. The U.S. and the PMF started fighting each other occasionally. And so the U.S. response basically to him saying that we'll disarm them once you leave is this official is saying, we're not leaving and you should disarm them now. So who knows where this is going to go in Iraq. All right, so the next one here, Israeli strike on southern Lebanon kills one person. So this is another one from Jason. So Israeli drones attacked a car in southern Lebanon, killing one person and wounding another, according to the Lebanese health ministry. That was the latest attack. There were some other strikes in southern Gaza. In this particular strike, a car was hit near a school in the town and sparked panic. It led to panicked parents rushing to the school to recover their children. And so the person, we don't know who was killed. IDF claiming Hezbollah, but you can't trust them. No identity or anything from the Lebanese side, but these daily, which they've become daily now, Israeli strikes in southern Lebanon continue. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. military draws up Nigeria war plans. So this article is from the New York Times. I just saw this kind of late. And so U.S. Africa Command has drawn up some plans for taking military action in Nigeria. But what's interesting here, so this New York Times report cites U.S. military officials who say that the American military cannot do much to quell the violence in Nigeria unless it is willing to start an Iraq or Afghanistan-style campaign, something that no one appears to be seriously contemplating. But they said there were some steps available to American war planners that could have limited impact on the militants. The Air Force could conduct airstrikes on the few known compounds in northern Nigeria inhabited by militant groups. Officials said American drones like the MQ-9 Reaper and the MQI-1 Predator could attack a few vehicles and even a handful of convoys, and American forces could team up with Nigerian soldiers to raid villages to root out insurgents who have ensconced themselves in rural hamlets in the country's north. These were all part of the options that officials with the United States Africa Command drew up this week, defense officials said to forward to the Joint Staff at the Pentagon. So this was after Trump's threat over the situation for the Christians in Nigeria. And then Hegseth said, I'm going to order plans to be drawn up. And apparently they have drawn up some plans here. So let's see. They get into some more details here. So officials at the command. So, one issue here that they mention is that the U.S. recently lost a major drone base in West Africa in Niger after the coup there. When did that happen? 2023? There was the coup in Niger, and they kicked the U.S. out, including of a drone base that cost like $100 million to build that was built relatively recently. So that makes things a little more difficult for the U.S. if they want to launch drone strikes in Nigeria. But this report says that there's 3 options that they've drawn up, what they call a light option, a medium option, and a heavy option. The light option would include what the military called partner-enabled operations, and under that option, the U.S. military and the State Department would support Nigerian government forces to target Boko Haram and other Islamic insurgents who have attacked, kidnapped, and murdered civilians, mostly in northern Nigeria, where sectarian and ethnic violence has raged for almost 20 years. The United States would have to conduct these operations without the expertise of the U.S. Agency for International Development. So that action would come with a host of issues, the thorniest being that the violence in the northern Nigerian Sahel falls along linguistic, cultural, and religious lines. Much of it is based on land use and tenure and is fomented in some cases by corruption in the Nigerian government. Farmers and herders in the region have battled one another over land use for decades, and militant Islamic groups have taken advantage of the distrust to push their own agenda. And as I understand it, it's like the herders that have killed more Christians over the past few years than Boko Haram and ISWAP, which is the ISIS affiliate, because they're in the north where it's mostly Muslim. And it's like these land disputes and attacks on Christian farmers where most of them are being killed. So how is the U.S. military supposed to handle that? But anyway, so the medium option being put forward by Africa Command includes drone strikes on militant camps, bases, convoys, and vehicles in northern Nigeria. And obviously there's other issues here. They mentioned the drone issue. They said that the drones might have to come from Djibouti. Let's see here. And then the heavy option would be to move an aircraft carrier group into the Gulf of Guinea and to deploy fighters and perhaps long-range bombers to conduct strikes deep in northern Nigeria. But that's probably not going to happen. So we'll see if what they do. The thing is that the U.S. backs the Nigerian government. Trump is threatening, I forget the classification. He redesignated them as some classification, accusing them of not allowing religious freedom. But the U.S. has backed Nigeria. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see them like increasing some of that cooperation. Is that it could just end up with that. One big thing about this is that, we've seen Zionists, Israel supporters point to the situation in Nigeria, basically to deflect from what Israel has done in Gaza. That's kind of a big part of this. And not to downplay the situation for Nigerian civilians. I mean, it's horrific. And it's something I've been aware of for a long time, just following Catholic media, because I'm Catholic. I read Catholic media, and I know for a lot of Catholic priests get abducted for ransom, and churches get attacked and destroyed, and it's really horrific. But what is the realistic option here for the U.S. intervention? Will, if they really launch a war, I mean, that's just going to make things worse. And if Nigeria, which is a huge country with a population of 240 million, if it plunges into full-scale civil war, I mean, that would be so horrific and brutal. But, there's just a lot of attention being put on this now, really to deflect from the genocide that Israel has committed in Gaza, which has included killing Christians at churches. All right, so the next one here, Somali defense minister confirms flights from Puntland to Sudan. This one is from Middle East Eye. So Somalia's defense minister has acknowledged that transport aircraft carrying undisclosed items are flying between Bosaso Airport and Western Sudan, following a Middle East Eye report last week detailing the use of such planes by the UAE to aid Sudan's paramilitary rapid support forces. On October 31st, Middle East Eye reported that undisclosed heavy logistical materials were being offloaded at the airport in Somalia's Puntland state before being loaded onto a different aircraft. So what's interesting about this is that, the U.S. backs the Somali federal government, and that's where this defense minister is from. But the U.S. also backs the Puntland state, which is essentially an autonomous region. And when I'm covering the U.S. drone strikes, airstrikes in Puntland, it's in support of this Puntland government against the ISIS affiliate in the mountains in a remote mountain region where these battles are happening. So this is the government that's facilitating the UAE's weapon shipments to the RSF, which is committing all sorts of atrocities in Sudan. It's another U.S.-backed government here. All right, so the next one, the last story, Russia mulls full-scale nuclear weapons tests. So Russian President Vladimir Putin has directed his top officials to submit proposals on the possibility of resuming what his defense minister called full-scale nuclear weapons tests in response to President Trump's order for the U.S. military to conduct nuclear tests. It was unclear from Trump's initial order, which he gave in a post on Truth Social, if he was referring to testing nuclear-capable weapons or actually resuming nuclear explosions, which U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright later said was not on the table, at least for the time being. Nevertheless, Trump's order set off alarm bells in Moscow and around the world about the prospect of the U.S. detonating nuclear weapons, something the U.S., Russia, and every other nuclear-armed power besides North Korea has not done since the 1990s. So at a meeting of the Russian Security Council on Wednesday, Russian Defense Minister Andrei Belousov said that it was important to analyze U.S. actions related to its strategic weapons, not just comments from U.S. officials. He pointed to the modernization of the U.S. nuclear triad, President Trump's order to develop a new Golden Dome missile defense system, and the fact that the U.S. has pulled out of several arms controls treaties in recent years. So Belousov said, quote, "In view of the above, I believe it is advisable to begin preparations for full-scale nuclear tests immediately. The operational capability at the central test site on the Novaya Zemlya archipelago allows for the rapid initiation of test preparations," end quote. Sergei Shoigu, the secretary of the Security Council, said that based on comments from U.S. officials, Russia was not clear about what the U.S.'s future plans are when it comes to nuclear testing. And then the chief of staff, Valery Gerasimov, it's been a while since I've been saying these Russian names, said that it would take anywhere from several months to several years to resume nuclear tests. And Putin basically said that Russia will maintain its moratorium on detonating nuclear weapons, on conducting, full-scale nuclear tests in line with the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, the CTBT, which the U.S. and Russia are both signatories to, but the U.S. never ratified it. Russia did ratify it in 2000, and they de-ratified it in 2023, saying that they were mirroring the U.S. position. So essentially, Putin says, basically, we're not going to start nuclear weapons tests, but we're going to get ready to do them if the U.S. does them, is essentially what he said in this meeting. So all because of that post on Truth Social, and then the U.S. officials not clarifying, because before the energy secretary said that they didn't plan to do explosions, Trump and J.D. Vance and Hegseth were all asked about this, and they didn't clarify anything. They said, oh, yeah, we're going to do nuclear tests. And, they didn't explain what that actually meant. So now you have the Russian Security Council meeting and saying, all right, we're going to start getting ready for this. So hopefully there's communication. That's another thing. Russia is saying that there hasn't been any communication from the U.S. on this. They've asked the U.S. to clarify. Hopefully there is some kind of clarification, in back channel diplomatic lines between the U.S. and Russia, and, we don't see nukes start blowing up. And also on Wednesday, the U.S. military launched an unarmed nuclear-capable Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missile from a Space Force base in California. So the U.S. test launches these ICBMs about 3 or 4 times a year, and the last time they did one was in May. So, and they said this was routine, so it could have been scheduled, or not clear if they launched it in response to Trump's order, which. I thought Trump was talking about tests like this because he gave the order after Russia tested a nuclear-capable missile and a nuclear-capable drone. But I think he just didn't know the difference, So here we are because of that. So that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints, one from Jeffrey Sachs and Sybil Fairs. Venezuela's oil, U.S.-led regime change, and America's gangster politics. One from Jamie Haas, Islam in America, sanctioned intolerance and indifference. One from J.D. Hester, Nobel Committee should revoke Venezuelan warmongers 2025 Nobel Peace Prize. One from Leon Hadar, why Israel isn't really a protectorate. And our spotlight from Jose Nino, why invading Venezuela won't be a walk in the park. I like how we have a lot of anti-war with Venezuela stuff, because certainly seems to be something we need to focus on now. So again, contact your senators, tell them to support the War Powers Resolution to block Trump from waging war with Venezuela. Hopefully it succeeds. We shall see. You could always support us by liking, subscribing, commenting. Tell your friends about antiwar.com. Tell them about this show. Share. I appreciate everyone who does. I will be back tomorrow. One more show this week. I will talk to you then. Thanks for listening.